Hello, I am from Johannesburg, and I have to tell you that I'm so cold in this auditorium that I think I'm half the man I used to be. It's absolutely terrible. And having had all these young speakers up here, the males in particular with their gelled hairdos, I spoke to Donald Trump, but he wouldn't lend me his bloody toupee. Otherwise, I too would have had a gelled hairdo here today. By way of an editorial disclaimer, I'm presenting off here, so I hope this won't die, and I promise I won't run late. Okay, I am watching the lights at the back. Noel Coward's father, true story, was a minister of religion. And he said this, he said, never trust short men. Their brains are too near their bottoms. So you can take what I have to say today with a pinch of salt, if you will. How many of you here in public relations? Would you raise a hand for me? Oh, fabulous, okay. Because I want to talk to you a little bit, very briefly, about the dramatic change in the media over perhaps the last 65 years. And today we have people called futurists. I hope some of you at least will be following Lee Ilkwoord on Twitter and in other media. I hope you will have read some of Faith Popcorn's books in South Africa, a Wolfgang Gruke or a Dr. Graham Codrington, for example. They are futurists who look at micro trends, and what they do is they extrapolate those micro trends into what we start to call seismic shifts, which means you get tectonic plates beneath society starting to change. And over time, some of those little micro shifts may turn into what is called a socio-quake, so a major revolution in communication. Now, in 1947, when the British royal family came to South Africa, it was a very simple dictum. The media, the press in particular, were asked, please don't photograph a member of the royal family while they're eating, because that tends to look undignified. If you think of the picture of Juju, who was holding a plate with some cream cake, and he had cream on his cheek, and he said, the ANC taught us to use cutlery. You may understand why it's not cool to photograph somebody eating. So that was the phase when the media was the friend. You could approach them and ask them to do things. Very recently, of course, as you know, Prince Harry took his clothes off internationally, and I understand, I saw a gorgeous little joke on Twitter. They said, he's been approached by a sponsor to become the spokesperson for ginger nuts. Now, in the day of President John F. Kennedy, he used to go to the Carlyle Hotel in New York City, and he would go in the front door, and the security detail would have an absolute nightmare because he would pop out the back and get up to all sorts of sexual shenanigans. That stuff was never written about. So again, the media was the friend. It was a case of there were certain things you simply didn't discuss and you simply didn't write about celebrities. But that began to change. And what really happened was, at the time that Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Baines Johnson took over as president of the US. A really interesting thing happened. For the first time, here was this tall, very crass Texan, and something came out in the media which showed that this presidential demeanor was not the perfect thing it was thought to be before. And Johnson was sitting with John Kenneth Galbraith one day. And Ken Galbraith passed away about 3 years ago. He was a brilliant young economist at that stage, and he landed up as Professor Emeritus of Economics at Harvard University. And he just presented to Johnson a whole exposition on what he thought would be the future economic roadmap for the United States. And Johnson looked at him and he said, Ken, don't you think talking on economics is a bit like pissing in your pants? It feels hot to you, but not to anyone else. So that was the first time that something came out of the president's mouth, which was put into the public domain and said, hey, you know, these guys actually don't live in an ivory tower, and we can communicate vulgar information that they've come up with. With the advent of the internet, we often think that the internet changed the way we communicate. What it really did is it took all of the methods of communication that we have today, and I love the way somebody described it. He said, if you picked up all these methods of communication and you slid the internet underneath it, all it became was a new distribution dissemination mechanism. So suddenly, stuff was able to go to a much, much wider audience, much, much more quickly. And with the advent of social media, and the advent of Tony Blair, who has, of course, just been in South Africa, a very interesting thing began to happen. For the PR students, I'm going to make a recommendation. It's a 700-page book called The Blair Years, written by Alistair Campbell, who was his press secretary. If you're in PR, you have to read that book. I devoured it in a day and a half. It is absolutely compulsive reading, because what it shows you is the degree of spin and the degree of manipulation that is used by politicians at that level. And the astonishing thing is you had a situation there which was not unlike in South Africa, where President Thabo Mbeki had Dr. Manto Tshabalala Msimang, who did rather extraordinary things, and he was never able to get rid of her. Tony Blair had a woman called Claire Short, and Claire would go into a cabinet meeting, which was meant to be confidential and sealed, and come straight out of that meeting and phone somebody from the press. And Simon Prescott, who was the British deputy PM, said to Tony, for God's sake, get rid of that woman. And Tony Blair couldn't. And I'm convinced that Claire had something on him, in the same way that I'm convinced that Manto Tshabalala Msimang had something on Thabo Mbeki. Otherwise, why would you not get rid of them? So, what Tony Blair did was he said very interestingly at this conference he was on a few days ago that he started out as Prime Minister with very few skills and a very high likability factor. And he said, and today what I find is I've got incredible skills and a very low likability factor. So there you have it. And what he did, and I think this was the downfall, he turned spin into an art form. And the ugly thing about spin is, to put it frankly, is it's bullshitting the public. And today, with social media, you simply can't do that, because there is always somebody backstage who will be releasing that information. You saw in a previous speaker's talk a picture of Julian Assange. What Julian Assange holed up in the Uruguayan embassy in London at the moment did with WikiLeaks is this. He has suddenly become a threat to governments around the world. What it means in the corporate sense in PR is very simply this. The dirt that is dished from your organization today does not come from outside of the organization. It comes from inside of the organization, and it's from people that you treated badly in their last performance appraisal. It's from people who feel they should have been promoted and you didn't promote them. And it's from people who feel they didn't get recognized. So what they do is they go to the carte blanches of the world, and they go to the Mail and Guardian, and they will dish the dirt on you. So the threat is internal, not external. What is quite wonderful is that you've seen it in presentation after presentation here today. The medium is the message. It's no longer face-to-face. It's become muckraking. Darren Lyons owns the biggest paparazzi organization in the whole world. They photograph Britney Spears off the island of Mallorca, and if she has hail damage on the bum, they upton it and they auction it for a fortune of money. So, very simply, today we do have collective ADD. We are overly concerned with style over substance, and what we've done is we've learned to be non-authentic. There's a little bit of humor that sums up the fact that we don't know people anymore. Forgive me, in Cape Town I have to tell it. A Khatib and Marai joke. They're in relationship counseling, and the relationship counselor says to Khatib, if you really know Marai, you will know her favorite perfume, you will know her favorite foods, and for example, Khatib, do you know Marai's favorite flower? And Khatib turned to Marai and said, self-raising, ne? So I want to leave a thought with you today. We heard this wonderful presentation up front that said, finish halfway and leave, it's for them to finish it. I want to leave this thought with you. We've lost authenticity and we've lost integrity. How do we get back to that as communicators, given the role of social media? So final thought for you, I love it. On Twitter, Joan Rivers was talking about Madonna as Madonna turned 54 years of age. And of course, Madonna is a phenomenal media brand. And this is what Joan Rivers said. She said, 54 years ago today, a delivery room doctor slapped Madonna's ass. And instead of crying, she said, oh, again, please. And are you single? Thank you.